All right, this morning, let's jump straight into Philippians chapter 1, verses 3 to 6. All right, I know some of you are still scanning that. Go ahead real quick. I'll give you another moment to be able to do that. But if for those of you who have your Bibles, feel free to turn to that. In the Pew Bible, you know what? I did not even check. That's the wrong book. Sorry. And so we'll also have it on screen for you as well. So this is Philippians chapter 1, verses 3 to 6. And I'm going to ask you to read it together. So all 4 verses, whether you read it in English or Mandarin, is your choice. All right? So I'm going to ask you to read this. This is Philippians chapter 1, verses 3 to 6. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, some of you might know that this particular book, actually letter really, was written by a guy named Paul, who was a missionary, who God had sent to go preach the word in amongst the Roman Empire, as we know as Asia Minor. And so he went to all these different places within that parts of the world. He came to this one place called Philippi. Now, Philippi, if you know your history, and I have to admit, I don't know all my history, but there is one part where Alexander the Great, when he started to expand the kingdom, he established this one city called Philippi. It was actually named after his father. And so Philippi, I know it's a little bit hard to see here, but there's actually this one main road that goes right through it, called the Galatian Way. It actually connected the west part of the empire to the east part of the empire. In fact, if you look at a map, it's kind of on the, I know again, a little bit hard to see here, but you see the Galatian Sea there, just above it is where Philippi is. And so it's very close to a waterway, but it's also kind of this connection between west and east. And so it's a very central city. And so Paul plants this church in this place called Philippi. If you get a chance to read Acts chapter 16, we're not going to do this right now, but if you get the chance to read Acts chapter 16, there's actually a couple of people that Paul meets in Philippi. The first person is a person named Lydia. Now, if you read about her, one of the things that it says is that she was actually a merchant of purple cloth, which is well, for us, we kind of go by it when we hear that, but for someone in the first century, it was actually that little nugget of purple cloth. I'm going to take a side tangent here. If the way that purple cloths were made, because it wasn't like today where you can get synthetic dyes, right? You can just make any colors of clothing. Either it had to be the natural color or you had to somehow use something to make it into that color. And so red and other colors, you can find that, but purple, there's only one way to do it in purple. Now, this might be a little bit gross. That's okay. It actually came from this marine snail that had this purple dye inside it. And what you would do is you would actually boil these snails so that the purple dye would come out. And that's how you made it. And in fact, the purple dye was actually seen, the purple clothing was actually seen as clothing for royalty or nobility, because only they could afford these kinds of clothing. And so Lydia, who Paul meets and who Lydia then becomes a follower of Jesus, is someone who is very involved in that area. There's also, if you read later on in Acts chapter 16, you'll hear about this one story where there's this jailkeeper of Paul. And the thing is that back then, especially with some prisoners, there would actually be guards who would essentially be attached to that person. And so on the one hand, it was meant to be a way to keep the prisoner from escaping. And this is where God has a sense of humor, because the thing is that you attach yourself to Paul now, there's no way you're getting away from Paul. Because when he wants to tell you about Jesus, where are you going to go now? And so this family the jailer hears hears about Jesus through Paul, and then his family becomes followers of Jesus. I mean, this was the kind of community that was being established, where you had people who were pretty wealthy, and you had people who had these, what might be seen as common jobs, and everywhere in between. This was the church in Philippi. And in verse 3, right, go back to verse 3, Paul says, "Every time I think of you, I give thanks to my God." Because he has a special relationship with them. And in fact, this church, at times, like again, there were some people who had great means of wealth and others who did not. And the church itself as a whole wasn't necessarily a very wealthy church, but they knew what it meant to serve Jesus. And they were willing to do anything to do that. In fact, one of the things is that Paul was actually financially supported by the church in Philippi. And so he knew of their generosity. He knew that even though in their context they didn't really have relatively a lot, that they knew this mission that God had sent Paul on, it was worth giving to. And so he received their generosity. In verse 6, let's go back to this again. Verse 5. "For you have been my partners in spreading the good news about Christ, from the time you first heard it until now." Sometimes we think that the mission that God has given us is just ours. And sometimes, for some of us, we feel that pressure. We feel that pressure that if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And yet, one of the things that Paul mentions here, and while Paul was one of the forerunners of the church throughout the Roman Empire, he relates back to the Philippians and says, "You have been my partners in spreading the good news." That word partner is actually translated as koinonia, which in some cases are translated as fellowship, as communion together, as community. This idea that it was this group that was brought together. And in fact, it wasn't just this particular group, it was this expansion of people. That wasn't just relying on Paul to do this by himself somehow. That there were others in different spaces, in different places, who would then take this message of Jesus and bring it to others who haven't heard it yet. And so he invites them. And it's interesting that, at least in this translation, it translates it as partners, because this idea that it's not just Paul who's kind of like the head that some people might see, but it's actually they're all connected into this mission together. They all have a place in this mission together. And the Philippians held on to that and they ran with it. In fact, later on you read how they were able to support different other places too. Again, not because they had a lot, but because they knew this was how valuable this was to do. That this mission that God had given them was something that was worth giving to, even if it cost them so much. Because the fact is that this is the good news. And in fact, in the Expositor's Bible Commentary, this is the way that they phrased it. A little bit hard to see, but let me read it out for you. The good work refers to salvation begun at their conversion. God not only initiates this salvation, but continues it and guarantees its consummation at the glorious coming of Jesus Christ, which will vindicate both the Lord and his people. Nothing in this life or after death can prevent the successful accomplishment of God's good work in every Christian. And so Paul realizes is that it's not just something that is being spread to others, but it's something that God is transforming in this group. And this group that as they begin to seek and understand who Jesus is, as they begin to fall deeper in love with who Jesus is, they begin to see this work that has to be brought out to other people. And it spreads and it spreads. And it's not just something that they do by themselves. They realize they as a church can't just do it all by themselves. They begin to actually help others to do it, because what you can do in your neighborhood, I can't do. And what you can do in your neighborhood, I can't do. But then they know by supporting all these other places that are happening, this is the mission of God. And his work will go to completion until the second coming. And we are a part of this too. Earlier we had mentioned how at the CBOQ, there's all these different connection points. And sometimes people ask me, what does it mean to be Baptist? Now, there's different distinctives of what makes a Baptist. We're not going to go through all of them. In fact, there's a poster outside. You can read it later on your own. There's one particular area that talks about the autonomy of the local church. So a church that tries to discern itself where God is leading it, that is not dependent on someone else telling them what to do. So on the one hand, there is that idea that we, as Mimico Baptists, we need to seek God's direction to see where God is taking us. But at the same time, we are not meant to do it by ourselves. In fact, again, you can read this outside. I'm just going to read the last 3 lines of this in this paragraph here. It says, Baptist churches also recognize the need to temper the exercise of their autonomy in order to associate by linking regularly, regionally, nationally, and internationally for ministry, mission, support, and fellowship. So in other words, it's not meant to just be Mimico Baptist is doing all this. No, it is meant to be Mimico Baptist. Yes, we are given a call, and we are in the middle of still discerning together what that next chapter is for our church family. We're still figuring this out, and that's okay. But in the meantime, we are not meant to do it by ourselves. And there's lots of different ways this play out, whether you realize it or not. Let me give you a few examples. Previously, Pastor Dave was mentioning how we are connected to an area of churches here, and one of them is through what's called Stonegate Ministry, and they serve primarily in the Parkside area. And this is one way that we get to extend, because we can't do all the work there, but they're doing a great thing there, so we get to support them in different ways through that. Also, go beyond that. Go internationally. A few weeks ago, we had what was called Solidarity Sunday with Canadian Baptist Ministries. They have different field staff all over the world, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in India, whether it's in China, right? Brazil, all these different places all over. Again, not because the fact is we can't go to all these places, but we can support the people who are already there. We are part of that work. We also get the chance to lean on other churches. So this is Lauren Park Baptist Church in Mississauga. And later on in August, our board will actually be spending a day at their church to discern, to think through, to see where God is leading us. And again, we were kind of thinking through what space could we go that's kind of separate from where we usually go to. And we reached out to them and they said, yes, come, use our space. Flip side happens. This is Camp Quassant. This is a camp up in about 2.5 hours north of here. And last December, they were hosting a staff celebration, Christmas celebration, and they were on this very platform celebrating together. We get to share that space with others. And maybe in the next few weeks, few months, especially through the summer, maybe you'll get a chance to visit another faith community. And when you go, we invite you to bring greetings from Mimico Baptist to them. Whether you want to do it informally, or whether you would like one of us to reach out to their pastor and let them know, hey, these people are coming on this Sunday. They are going to bring greetings on behalf of Mimico Baptist. Whatever way that happens. This is what it means to be a family of churches. I know today's CBOQ Sunday, it's supposed to be, usually you'll qualify as Baptist churches, but let's go beyond that. In God's kingdom, we are a family of churches transformed by Christ trying to reveal his kingdom to the world. It's all centered on Jesus. Because who Jesus is, because of what he's done already, what he continues to do, this is meant to be the good news that we are meant to bring to others. That the God of the universe who stepped back and is so grand that he steps back, he is so big, he can step outside of the universe and see us. And yet knows you so intimately. He knows not just your very DNA, he knows the very building blocks of your very soul. This is the God who says to you, I love you. And how do we bring his message of love, of justice, of mercy to the people around us? Not just through words, but also through actions. As we continue to discover what that means as Mimico Baptist Church, we then continue to see how others are already doing that and how can we support them in doing that. But all centers around Jesus.